I'm Teresa Coraggio, and this is Third Paradigm. And this is my inaugural interview that I am doing of someone else. And this is of Gabriel of Libre Solutions Network.
Hello.
The reason that I had wanted Gabriel to be my very first guest is because we've been talking now for, what do you think, 2, 3 years?
Yeah, it's been a couple since at least the thick of the COVID years for sure.
Yeah, yeah. And I have always admired Gabriel's clear thinking. I think of Gabriel as one of the most systematic thinkers that I know, someone who looks at the big picture, but who also sweats the details and looks at the pragmatic of how do you do this? How do you make this happen? The series that I was wanting to do is looking at my caret system from How to Dismantle an Empire and going to the next level of really how to build a commonwealth and saying, what are the things that we want to do and how could this system be used in order to make that happen? And Gabrielle has agreed to be my guinea pig and play with me. So, Gabriel, can you tell us a little bit about you?
Yeah, so I would say what really got the ball rolling is that during the depths of the COVID years, I was trying to talk to people about technology and technology freedom at local meetups and that kind of thing. And I realized, hey, if I'm talking to so many people, preparing presentations, why not write it down and share it? And that was a good experience. It was a way for me to kind of like raise my level of productivity because, to be frank, during the depths of those years, it was hard to function at all. And so I was really trying to reclaim some amount of personal autonomy while trying to push for digital autonomy was really the big picture idea behind that project. And I'll say it's gone quite well. I'm very grateful for the opportunities I've had by taking that on. But lately, I've kind of shifted gears a bit because I have really spent a lot of time focusing on reclaiming my physical health, which was certainly a big part of the contradiction of those years where it's like, oh, I was in so much, health freedom spaces. Well, maybe I should prioritize health. And that's been an interesting learning process that Teresa has been very kind in engaging with me on as I because I've been sharing all of it publicly, and you're pretty much one of the people there in the comments most of the time, so it is certainly appreciated. And it's been quite a hurdle, that's for sure. And I'm not even done. I've just certainly mitigated a lot of COVID era damage, but to me, I have a integrated understanding of many of these different fights. And as I told Teresa before the start of this, it's like I am a lot less sure of things now than I ever was in the past. It's like I was so lit up with fire of like, oh, we just need to do this, but now I'm like, no, I'm realizing the details are certainly a lot more finicky than even I was willing to dive into at the start of all this.
Tell me more about that. Tell me more about what brought you to that realization or what exactly that is.
Well, I would say in a really simple nutshell, I spent a lot of years of my life kind of avoiding, real life, so to speak. Spending a lot of time online is fun. It's a great, escape from many of the difficulties of things. And it gets really easy to be all in your head. It gets really easy to just play with the ideas and not put things into actual practice. And that kind of, I would say, contradiction is something I'm trying to resolve now by trying to take more, action in real life and do actually accomplish various things. But it's like, I'll admit it is a difficult road. And you realize once you start putting many things into practice, a lot of those like pretty ideas and theories don't actually, land well with reality. And that's really hard to experience because it gets really easy to just then go retreat back entirely into the abstract and be like, oh, well, the real world's messy. So I'm just got to keep playing with these ideas. It's the kind of thing. And it's like, I'm realizing it's like there is a lot of actual value in creating things rather than, say, barking out orders or coming up with plans. And it's like that's really what I have been wrestling with. And it's kind of hard to realize that it's like, yeah, reality is messy. Real people are messy, and that can be terrifying, but it is what you have to do fundamentally. And that's very much been at the forefront of the many struggles I've been taking on lately.
That's so interesting because I feel like some of our Substack friends, and I'm thinking particularly of Kathleen Devaney, have been writing about there being just a general shift in people moving away from online and more into the real world. Um, and I've been feeling that. I've been feeling that too, although I wouldn't necessarily say that it is all in terms of relationships. An awful lot of that has been me moving away from so much online connections and more towards writing a book, writing a second book called Oh My Goddess. But it seems like other people have been going more into nature, that they've been um, just retreating from a lot of the back and forth and arguments that happen online. I don't know
Well,
whether you see that.
I had a word for this when I first noticed that like ChatGPT and generative AI was really starting to pick up when it kind of first entered the scene. I wrote a piece called The Collapse of the Intangible. When I was trying to explain is that I kind of saw this bifurcation between the virtual world and the real world. And I would say a very stark contrast of this would be somebody who's like, oh, you got to, get really good at AI or you're going to get left behind. So they're playing in all these systems. They're getting more consumed by whatever this is, and all they are quote unquote producing is in this immaterial world. And this can be ideas, this can be like research, this can be programs, whatever it is. Fundamentally it's all the same kind of game. But then there's also, like you say, there's this real world that people are trying to reclaim and reconnect with, when honestly my, I guess, spicy take on this is that I do think it's not so much that people chose to forsake the real world. I think one of the reasons your book is helpful for people to understand the bigger picture of all this stuff is that in many ways, I would argue, especially, younger generations were somewhat evicted from the real world in some ways. There were opportunities that used to exist, mentorship, these kinds of things that became rare, became less, abundant. And so I think there is a push and pull. There's a lot of social dynamics behind all this. I mean, I could talk about those things all day, but the point I'm really trying to get at here is that I think what is making this current moment in time so hard, especially for our friends on Substack, is you have people, AI generating content, and what's the purpose? Why are we doing this? Why are we, just getting words out there? Is that really what we've been trying to accomplish all along? Did we just need the perfect Substack article that changes everybody's lives, or is there more behind all this that ultimately matters? And that's a much harder question. And I think wrestling with that requires us to face things that are actually way more complicated than just, oh, how do I write the next thing? It's a very difficult game. But the good news is, like, that's where I realize all the opportunity is. One of the like drums I've been trying to beat this entire time is once we kind of change how we think about this game, so to speak, what we're actually trying to accomplish, I actually think a lot of stuff is actually very much within reach. For me, one of the many things I've been trying to do is I've been trying to work on my own actual skills. And I'm realizing it's like the bar for making a difference is way lower than one would think. Again, it's like if you're in this hyper reality online matrix, it's like, oh, it's like nothing's going to work because everything's corrupt anyways. But it's like, I don't know, maybe we can just try a couple of things here and there. And maybe it doesn't have to completely upend everything. Maybe the small stuff can matter. And I think that's probably one of the hardest places for people to kind of mentally rethink the bigger game right now.
That's so interesting, Gabe, because I love the way that you turn around this idea of AI as actually making just the churning out of material something that's pointless.
Mm-hmm.
What I've said is that the reason that I write, the reason I put out episodes is to teach myself something new. Because especially from the very beginning of doing YouTube videos, I couldn't I couldn't make it where people were actually listening to me. The only thing I could control was whether I taught myself something new. And that's the thing that AI doesn't do, is that it goes through the motions and can be useful, I think, for some
Oh
things.
yeah, I'm not knocking the tool itself for sure.
Exactly, yes. But what it can't do is teach yourself something new. You're not on that journey of creating. And I was just thinking about AI art, that I think that's a contradiction in terms. I think AI decoration is actually a lovely, fun thing that has made that accessible. But it's not art because it's not creating anything new, because by definition, it can't do that. All it can do is synthesize and combine things that are already out there.
Well, I would go as far as to say this is something I've been thinking about lately is that I do think the aspect of choosing to create is itself a form of rebellion in this entire big picture fight people are in right now. Because I do think a lot of the way, like, AI tools exist in their own kind of like system that it's like they can be done in certain ways, but I believe the way in which I would say, Wall Street and governments are kind of like pushing this out, and I like the way Patrick Wood was like, it's empire, it's just empire. It is like obviously very relevant to your book, but like the thing is that what it's trying to assimilate people into structurally is this system where it's like you don't need to have any individual agency or talent or whatever. It's like you are just participating in the game. And the way I kind of think about it is if somebody is on X right now, and Substack has similar problems, but on X it's more obvious, where it's like they're just competing for ad dollars, and so they have to, pump out the slot because that's what people expect and that's what they want. And then you're just participating in this game. And one of the hardest things I think to teach people nowadays is that you can play other games. It's not like being the biggest personality on X is the only way to have an impact on the world. But I'll admit, as somebody who's like been very sucked into the online world, that illusion is very, very strong. I think it's actually really easy for, those of us who are trying to find something new to kind of look down on those people. It's like, oh, they're just, rubes who, are tricked by the machine. But I'm like, no, this illusion's very powerful. It's like the kind of thing that it's like not a lot of people have seen how fake things are. And so it's hard to appreciate the boundaries between those things. And a perfect example is like AI art, I would say it's a very obvious example because people intuitively understand, I would say, the soul and the creation behind it. But when you talk about like programmers, many of them are like, let's just say, way more comfortable with using AI tools. But then it leads to this question of like, well, if it's all immaterial anyways, what is the soul behind it? Generally you don't see the same kind of attitudes behind software development. And I do think that field is kind of worse off in this ways, is that you don't see, I would say, the broader community aspect behind it. And that's a big part of the fight in those spaces right now. There's questions about how are we going to have people. And I saw a great post somewhere, I wish I could find it, but somebody was basically saying, are we going to have another great project? And the example they gave was Linux. A lot of people are talking about installing Linux on their computers now, but the question, that was a solo project by one person who was just motivated to solve a problem. And in this age of AI where you can just generate things, whether they're good or not, whether they accomplish, the mission or not, the question is, are we really going to have someone who is so motivated to actually build something unique and game changing in this world that we're in moving forward? And I actually think that is the real danger. The danger is not, oh, that the AI doesn't say what we want it to. The danger isn't that, oh, it's censored or whatever. No, the issue is that it allows us to assimilate ourselves into this system that I would say is a bigger act of censorship than whatever it does or doesn't say or does or doesn't create. That's to me the real issue. And it's hard because where I think your book especially is very relevant to a lot of this is that people kind of just want to blame the victims. They just want to say, oh, the people stuck using these tools, they're just fools, they're just, stupid, whatever it is. But it's like, if you don't see the bigger game, you're not going to appreciate why are people falling into these traps? Why are these traps, really sucking in so many people? And to me, that's kind of a big animating force behind what I think is important nowadays, where it's like, we need to show people that there are different paths, but at the same time, we can't like beat them over the head with, oh, you didn't take that path, therefore you deserve whatever happens to you. Cause I'm like, no, that's not what I think, whatever. It's like, no, people do deserve better. That should be, at least in my mind, the guiding principle behind this. We should want good for others, not just condemn them for going down a different path.
I think that's such a nuanced view, and it's in a way it's hard to untangle this because I started out really working in the school system when my kids were young and trying to make a difference. And what I found is that locally, you as a parent cannot add a minute to the school day, that you are boxed in by these systems, and that then I went from giving up on making any difference locally to working on things that were global. and saying, okay, at least now I'm going to be with other people where they're not saying, how does this affect me? Because it's not going to affect us. It's only going to be global. I've backed off from that too now. I've said that I don't think you can be an activist until you know what you want, that you have to be a strategist first, and that you have to understand what's really going on. Because if I were to be engaged locally right now, I would be pulled in so many directions of doing marches for ICE protests, and I live in the liberal bastion of the world, really. and and so that local engagement, you're just spinning your wheels, and they know that they've got, we're being so manipulated against one another. So, in a way, what my system is doing is really stepping away from all that and saying, let's figure out a strategy for what it is that we want to see happen, and then put that in motion, that we don't have to see how it can happen, that if we know what we want to have happen, that that's really the first step.
And what do we want to have happen? Because I'll admit there's a question I've been like thinking about lately about how what I call it MacGuffin thinking is that like one of the traps I've kind of fell into in this whole, activism space is that like I used to think it was just, fiat currency, it was just central banking. That was the totality of the control grid, so to speak. And so then the obvious conclusion is once you see that, you're like, oh, well, once we just get rid of this MacGuffin, we get rid of central banking, everything is fixed. And that's why you'll see a lot of people saying, like, oh, we need gold and silver as currency. Once that's back, everything, it's like the end of the movie where all the villains' magic disappears and everything's going away. And to be honest, I've been there. Like that was very much at the forefront of my mind. And that's what I said. I think I wrote to you when I started reading your book about like you did a great job kind of disabusing me of that notion, specifically when it came to those things, because it's like I didn't realize how much these hard currencies could be manipulated and were. This wasn't just something that could theoretically be done, it's something that's happened. And we see this, like I think even Tucker Carlson did a big interview lately about how, oh, everybody's got to get back on the gold standard or whatever it is. And unfortunately, this is where, like I said at the start of this, it's like I am a lot less sure of things than I used to be, because when I started out, going to these local activist groups, I would hear people talking about these different forms of MacGuffin thinking. But then I kind of started to notice that it's like generally there was some concrete business or empire reason behind it. Now it's never more clear than, the whole AI push. It's like, oh, you got to, use these, centralized systems that are going to, dominate these things. But the thing is the tough part about it is that like even local activist groups will have, I would say, infiltrators and bad actors and people just trying to take advantage of other people, and they don't even have to be in cahoots with the big tyrants. They can be little tyrants just trying to run their own fiefdom, whatever it is. And so the challenge I see is that people are being brought into this kind of MacGuffin thinking of like, we just need this one thing, and once we do this one thing, everything will be better. But we don't realize that it's like, again, one of the background things I've learned in all this is like there is a lot of bizarre financial engineering that is very complex that people just like don't really see. And that's a very hard thing to disentangle, because it's like if you think for example, the fact that we're on a fiat currency is itself the devil, it's like you're not going to also know all the complicated stuff of the derivative markets, how that involves with the insider trading. A lot of people are talking about poly market these days. There's all this kind of engineering that if you're like not aware of, you can be manipulated in ways that kind of feeds into that system. And even you said something that you liked a phrase I used, carrying water for things. And it's like a lot of people can be innocuously led into doing things that on their surface seem benevolent or harmless, but actually I've come to learn it's like, no, there's a lot more stuff going on behind the scenes that if you're not aware of, it can have impacts. And that it's like it's lead me to have way more questions than answers these days.
Yes, and now with my in my How to Dismantle an Empire, I go back 3,500 years to the origins of money, but in Oh My Goddess, I'm going back 5,000 years and further, because I'm looking at the origins of hierarchy and that ideology of obedience that's built into that. And what I found is that essentially civilization ended with the beginning of the Bronze Age. that these metals were all used for weapons. And so it isn't the metals themselves that were valuable. It was the fact that it gave you killing power over other humans that let you dominate, but they would have just been tools if it hadn't been for that ideology that that's okay. And that's where I think, circling back to my book, you have to separate out form and purpose. That we think that digital currencies are the enemy, but it's because that's being used for a purpose of centralization and control and domination. But if you have the same digital currency and you're using it for the purpose of local sovereignty, the form doesn't matter. It's really the purpose that does.
Yeah, and that's where I am. Speaking of MacGuffin thinking, it's like there is this kind of idea that, oh, if the bad guys have this, that they will finally enslave us. And I'm actually very critical of that nowadays, because it's like, especially if you read How to Dismantle an Empire, it's like, well, how free are people really these days? But even further than that, I see a lot of these systems as completely interchangeable. With all the censorship, with all the different mechanisms of control available these days, I don't really think there is one thing their empire is really wrestling on. Though, if you wanted to go in that regard, you've got the anarchists saying statism, or at least the idea of authority itself, is some, kind of foundational piece of this. But to me, as somebody who isn't very well versed in the history and the philosophy of a lot of this stuff, I would just say the way I kind of sort of understand it nowadays is it's like there has been this game competition, this war of human domination throughout history that we're born into. We have, certain situations that we're born into that are part of this game, and we don't have control of that. But at the other hand of this kind of thing is like there are consequences to every single thing. And that's where one of the things I learned from you early on is you were kind of pointing out, pardon my imprecise phrasing here, but you kind of made the argument, it's like nobody can actually do good, because if we actually understood how evil the system is, and how we participating in itself perpetuates that evil, there are no good options, is basically the thing. And it's like, emotionally, I certainly didn't really emotionally resonate with it, but logically I understand the point being made there, which is that, like, again, these games are very complex. The long arc of history is beyond, like, I certainly don't understand all the things that have happened. And so what does unwinding tyranny and oppression that has gone on for centuries even look like? How do we even comprehend our individual role in these bigger games? And again, it's like I don't have answers to that, but it's something that it's like I've been thinking about a lot, because a lot of people right now, I think they see the unfairness of all the systems around us. They see what is obviously very incoherent and dysfunctional, and they're desperate for something new. They're desperate for something that can work, that can introduce a sense of fairness, a sense of, hey, at least we're building to something better now. Because I actually think, when you think of like all these like young lonely men who are like bootlicking for the empire, whatever, it's because it's offering them something. And I think that's kind of the hard part we're at right now, where there's this kind of like division game going on, and people are just desperate for a system that offers them something. And I guess for most of human history, empire has offered people quite a bit.
Yeah, and tying those together, the reason that I would say that you as an individual can't really do any good, you don't have any good decisions to make, is because to think otherwise is to think that somehow you were born better than everybody else who's come before you for 5,000 years. You would have to think, okay, if I'm a moral person, if I make these moral decisions, this is going to make a difference. Well, didn't everybody else think that too? So that's why I really focus on the system. And I say that I think anarchists, I have it, I think that we're looking at a form of anarchy that is mistaken, that true anarchy can only happen as community anarchy. That if you're one person against the empire, you're always going to be looking for, how do I get the best deal from this?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That If you're a community and you have layers of protection, and the purpose of your tiny community, even at the level of the neighborhood, is to protect the sovereignty of your household. And then the next level, the village, say, is to protect the sovereignty of your neighborhood. So you have all these different layers where they're interlocked, and there's no one sovereign that they all report up to. You are always able to compare notes, so that if one tiny little hamlet is able to figure out a way to break free and do something different, something as simple as reporting the news correctly or telling the real
Right.
history of something, then all the other ones are going to be made into fools, because it only takes one good apple to cure the barrel.
I mean, that's definitely a great example of where I think actually the bar for making a difference is a lot lower than people would think. And especially when it comes to like this whole community aspect of it, to it, that there's like different layers. This was something I kind of like really started to think really strongly about, when it's in the sense that it's like, again, there was this MacGuffin thinking, and it's like, oh, once the bad guys have this new technology, the game's over. And I'm like, well, we just don't have to believe in game over. We can decide, we're going to fight whatever this is until the bitter end. But the other side of it too is that I realize that it's not that we have no community engagement, and like many of these things, to enslave us. They got rid of the community social fabric to enslave people. That's just the continuation of that process. And it's like, I think what's very hard for people to recognize, and to me this has to do with I would say, the culture wars and how it goes into the whole ageism dimension, where you've had this agenda that has gone over for multiple generations, and it's had different impacts on different people. For instance, if you're on X right now, you're seeing a lot of young angry people saying, well, the boomers took everything away from us, so we're just going to go for their social security, because that's socialism for the old. And the thing is that I can kind of see both sides of it, where you have young people who are very angry about opportunities that they feel have been withheld from them. They're very angry about, I guess, a social contract they feel hasn't given them the ability to participate. But then you have people who live their entire lives, quote unquote, not doing anything wrong, now having all these stuff taken from them by a bunch of people who are kind of like made to be in that situation. And one of the things that I think is really important to kind of disentangle from this is the fact that it's like they are engineering some kind of like precarity, so that those people can be used to strike against another people, so that those people then are in a new form of precarity that strikes against another people. And it's like, I see this kind of going in vicious cycles. And it's hard, because it's like, I think what makes that conversation so difficult is that if you actually look at it and you want to be honest with people, it's like, look, somebody is going to have to eat the cost of the mistakes that have happened over however many decades, and nobody wants to be the person to eat that cost. And so it's very convenient to say, oh, we're just going to pass the buck. And I think what makes our current time so chaotic is basically you have, I would say, younger people who are being given that offer by empire. Oh, you're not going to have to pay that cost if you just let us take all the power. Is basically the deal with the devil, as I see it in this situation. And it's very hard, because it's like rebuilding that community interaction, that rebuilding those trusts is basically trying to play defection, a game theory game, where it's like these people are being incentivized to defect from each other. And I think the destruction of the social bonds in communities and even families, and this overlaps with something I saw. I think you might have commented on it too, but there was this article about estrangement ideology, therapists brainwashing kids to like never talk to their parents. And it was fascinating to me, because it's kind of like the whole Russian bots thing, where, oh, just because there's a propaganda outfit out there, that doesn't mean there's not like a real root of hurt that's being dealt with. And so the thing is that I think we have to be very, very serious about what has happened as far as social family bonds. And some of that's personal. It's not all the bad, evil system, destroying families against, there's stuff happening on the family level too. But then on the other hand of it, there are these real structures kind of tearing it apart, and it creates opportunities for this kind of thing to escalate further. So I'm going on a complete tangent here, but it's like that's kind of how I see this big picture game of like the community bonds themselves are so vital to ensuring local sovereignty. And that was something that was targeted, I would say, way before AI came into the space, way before internet censorship became an issue, way before some of the more contemporary topics got all the attention.
Right. And there's someone who I study, Gottfried Feder from World War II, and his statement was that socialism is the politics of envy. And that has really struck me, living especially in a college town, is that there is such a resentment of why should you own a home? It's a privilege. Whereas you would never have thought that even one generation ago. You would have thought that to take responsibility for a home, because a home owns you, you don't own it, the same as children, that's not a privilege. That is adulting. That is a rite of passage. It's learning how to take responsibility and pass that on. And they've made it where instead of saying, wow, how can everybody have what I have? Instead, it's other people saying, well, I can only have that by taking it away from you. It's that
Mm-hmm.
what is that analogy of like trying to crawl out of the glass and then they're tearing each other down. So what my system does is go back to who built the houses originally and looking at that as a legacy that belongs to all of us, that within our communities, that's the inheritance that should be distributed, not as houses, but by taking the mortgages and distributing those equally to all of the commoners, which is how I describe the native and long-term residents. And that gives us the necessity of being able to pass on the gift, to do something, but to do things that are ordinary, where you don't have to make some crazy amount of money and invent some big global, new thing that is you don't have to make a killing. You can just make an ordinary living by doing an ordinary service or product that you're supplying to your neighbors, and that's going to be equal to the cost of housing in your community.
And I would say one of the things that I was thinking about the other day in regards to this was the fact that like people kind of understand planned obsolescence. We have consumer goods nowadays that do not last anywhere near as much as they could fundamentally. There's this broader economic question of like, oh, we needed, quarterly profits, so we need people to constantly buy refrigerators, towels, like every little thing. And I think especially, one of the ways I could imagine somebody attacking your system, for example, is saying, oh, well, houses are, decrepit and they're basically a liability anyways. They could basically say houses have no value because look at how, horrible in shape many of them are. And I'm sure that's a big problem in many, jurisdictions. But the thing is that I think the longer term view of this is that if our economy wasn't predicated on these kinds of, like, I would say, lose interactions where it's like you're paying for something that doesn't have the quality that, again, like, I don't think it's a secret on how we can build a fridge that lasts a long time. Like, I don't think that's a engineering mystery or marvel these days. And so I think there's a lot of low hanging fruit about like building quality again. If we can somehow create a virtuous cycle that makes that part of the equation, that can definitely pay off in a lot of these areas. And that's where, I think a lot of the people who point out that tyranny is actually ridiculously expensive and that there is a lot of opportunity if we actually do figure out how to kind of, I would say, navigate in a different direction. I mean, obviously the question is like, well, how do we do that? That's a fair question that I don't have the ultimate answers for, but I think it is important for people to realize that it's like we're not just talking about playing the game as it exists now. We're not talking about, oh, we're just going to swap in, whether it's Bitcoin or some other system for a new token that's going to change everything. It's like, no, we're talking about fundamentally playing different games when it comes to the economy, when it comes to like our jobs, our lives, how we treat people. All of those things do matter on this, equation, what we're trying to change here.
Right. And as you know, I'm about system change. But I think you're totally right that it actually wouldn't take that much. That, as I think most of us now know, when the banks put out that mortgage, all they're doing is wiggling their phalanges over a keyboard and putting some number into an account and usurping ownership of the home. That usury is not interest, usury is usurping ownership, so that then we're working for 30 or 60 years with dual incomes in order to give our labor to them because they've taken ownership of the houses. And that is something that isn't even, it's not even in the United States. It's not part of the Constitution. It's not a bill. It's not a law. It's a little technical term within the financial industry that technically banks are the only ones that are allowed to create money and then have it be in their own account. So all we have to do is change that technicality, rescind that exception to the rules. And the only people that that would hurt would be the global bankers, the richest people on the planet, the Rothschilds. So that's a change that wouldn't technically take very much. And once you take that ownership of the houses and the ability to create that money and create those mortgages and have it only be available locally, then you can make all kinds of changes. And you're absolutely right when you say that knowing how things work, if you were to say, okay, now we're just going to take this money and put it in everybody's pocket and they can use it to pay their rent or mortgage, all you're doing is raising the level of those mortgages because
Mm-hmm.
they're competitive. So if everybody's got $500 more a month in order to bid on the house, that just gets absorbed again. So my system says that carrots need to change hands at least once before they can be used for housing. And that specifically, when you're talking about the decrepit, how homes have gotten decrepit, which absolutely, of course they have, because we're bidding based on how much money
Mm-hmm.
we can possibly spend every month for the next 30 years. There's nothing left for maintenance. You're spending all your time earning that money and you're spending all that money paying the mortgage for nothing, just to be extracted to them. So instead, one of the things that I have as part of my subsidies, which are the things that carrots go out as, so that they have to be used for specific things, is home improvements, and that means that you can not just have the money to be able to do that, but you also create the jobs so that people can make the cost of housing by learning how to do those trades. So it works in both ways. And I feel like there was an importance. If there is purpose in life, I feel like there was a purpose for me to be living in two places where I was born in Appalachia in a very impoverished town. And I still have my childhood home there right now as an Airbnb. And then here, which has the highest cost of living in California, well, not just in California, but in the country, compared to the amount of income. So I have two different extremes where I live. And that's why I can say that you as a community need to be able to tailor your carrot system to your needs because you can't do the same thing in all places. There, the cost of the houses are totally decrepit because nobody's got money. There's no money in circulation to fix them up. Here, the cost of housing is crazy exorbitant, crazy, crazy, crazy. So you've just got those two different extremes, and in one place you need to bring the amount of money in circulation up. In the other, you need to bring the cost of housing down.
Yeah, and that seems to be a big part of the big political fights going on right now. Like I remember there's a big announcement by Trump lately talking about not letting the housing prices go down. And the thing is I hear a lot of quote unquote, free market people saying, "Oh, we just need to get the government out of this whole debacle and then everything will be fine." And I've used to be again very sympathetic to this mindset because I'm like, "Oh, well, the central banking MacGuffin is the thing that determines why all of this is wrong." And so, yeah, you just leave things alone. But the problem is, and this is something that like Catherine Austin Fitz is very vocal about, which is that if you kind of just say, okay, we're going to stop now and things are fair now, you kind of just entrench whatever manipulation has been, going on. And so this is where I think like it's really important for people to consider whatever system we want to change into or whatever we want to adopt, either in piecemeal or in whole. There is this important question of what are we doing moving forward rather than necessarily, I hate to say it, just correcting mistake from the past. Because one of the ways I kind of see this is that there has been effectively a large game going on for many rounds, and it's not as simple as, oh, we just stop the game here and play a different game. It's like there is a transition, there is things changing, and like you say, house maintenance is a very basic example of like, well, people are going to have to work those jobs. There are real pragmatic concerns on people's lives as for not just how the game is but how we want to change the game or how we move from one game into another. And that's where it gets really tricky, is that I think one of the things that holds so many people back is there is this kind of idea that the current game we're in, for better or worse, feels permanent. It feels like nothing can change. It feels like, the any attempt to do something different feels like a huge cost to bear. And one of the things I kind of like about, again, your book talked about it, and I believe it was there was this charity drive where it's like there was $300 given to teach some class, and there was given, to go to a charity in Palestine or something like that. And the thing is that by people creating an exchange that's kind of win-win, it's like I'm willing to do this for you and you're willing to kind of do something a little different in that regard. It's not like you're doing anything that out of the ordinary. And to me, I had this simple way of thinking about it where it's like, if we want something different than what the empire currency does to us, we have to value things that aren't just the empire currency. And that's where I think a lot of this gets difficult, because for many of us who are in some kind of situation of precarity or whatever, the empire currency still has value. The idea that we can just forget about it and pretend it's gone, no, it still will it exists in a real form and has real hold over people. And I would say when it comes to where do we individually want to intervene, I think that leads to some very interesting questions about those of us with some flexibility or those of us with some capacity. How do we want to be part of whatever transition away from how things are currently run to how things will be run, and hopefully a better game one way or another?
Exactly. And I don't at all get rid of the imperial currencies because I want those. If we were to trade those out at a one-to-one basis, all we'd be doing is making ourselves subject to the same discrepancy that's already happened. So, what I'm doing with the caret system is essentially just taking back the houses and having the houses then back the carets so that they definitely have value. But then the things that you, as a designer for your Commonwealth, have to play with is what kind of exchange rate do you want to give between the caret and the imperial currency? Because here in the extremely high priced place that I'm living now, that people come in from Silicon Valley and raise that cost of living. And of course, we have the hedge funds that are buying up all the sand and sun properties. And so you have all that huge chunks of money that are coming in and driving things up. And so having an exchange rate where, let's say, if you're going to be from outside the area and try to come into Santa Cruz and buy a house, it's going to be $2 for every caret. And all houses, all mortgages are going to be priced in carets. So if you're a local, then you have a 2-to-1 advantage over someone coming in from the outside. And then if they are extracting value, if they're buying up and making them into rentals, every time that money leaves, it leaves as a caret, but you're only giving 50 cents for every caret. So you're again taxing that and cutting that in half so that you don't have that extraction going on.
And I think that's a big part of the financial side of a lot is what has happened is that I think the way Fitz describes it is that basically Wall Street has cheaper capital than most regular people. And so one of the things people are kind of asking themselves is where did all the entrepreneurs go? And I guess in short, I'm not, a financial wizard in this regard, but like my understanding of the problem is that you have basically financial games that can be played that allow the big boys to kind of run these kind of operations. Private equity buys a hospital, they basically gut it inside and then let it go bankrupt, and suddenly a community's down a hospital. Like this financial engineering has real stakes. But then the question is, you're like a regular person on the low level, you're like, well, why can't I just fund a hospital? Why can't we get together and do the same thing? And the answer, as Fitz describes it, as I understand it, is that it is more expensive for you who has to like but get it from a bank and like have the collateral and all these things, whereas Wall Street gets to do kind of what the AI bubble has been doing, which is, oh, we're all gonna like loan each other the same $100 over and over and over again. And it creates this kind of extreme power imbalance that I think is very easy to see as far as the impacts it's having on regular people these days and all these different institutions. And I think one of the things your system is kind of aimed at doing is showing people it's like, well, there are ways that at least people can try to play that kind of game, but in reverse. How do we from the ground up build up virtuous cycles that allow us to kind of create liquidity into doing better things? And again, I do think the fundamental idea people need to understand for that to even work is understanding we are valuing different things than just the imperial currency. And sometimes it's not even just the caret itself. Sometimes it's more like, we have this altruistic cause we care about. We care about, say, the youth in our society having skills and being able to do things. And so maybe people are willing to teach for, a discounted rate, whatever the arrangement can be. Though I very much see it as about changing what we value rather than just trying to design a new game and play it, is very much what I see.
I would say yes and no. I don't
Okay.
think it's changing what we value. I think it's having a way because that way doesn't exist. What's the
True.
point? And to say that we would change what we value would make it a moral decision. And I'm saying it's not morality that we're lacking. We know what we want, but there is no way to do it. As long as the banks own all the houses and create all the money, they own us. There's no middle ground with that. And so my system change isn't a gradual thing. It is night and day. It is the banks have the ability to create the money for the mortgages, or we do. And there's no compromise between that. But once we do have that ability, then our labor is ours to organize. That money is a means of organizing labor in the interest of whoever creates it. With the banks creating the money, our labor is all being used to make the rich richer. That is the only game in town. If we are creating that money, then we're organizing our labor. And our only question is, how do we want to do that? So, one of the things that we can do, for instance, for that hospital, is use eminent domain. We can take anything that is extracting money from our communities, and we can use eminent domain to claim anything within our borders. And then we can create the loan in that imperial currency that then pays them off for it. That just and it doesn't matter how much of that imperial currency you create because it's all going down. So so don't worry about it because once you create that loan, it becomes a loan to yourself in your own currency, in carats. And for all the money that's coming in every month, you get to create that in advance and push it out. So the more that you have in loans for something like a hospital, the more that you have that you can push out there and you can give everyone a monthly subsidy for healthcare. And that way, you have as much coming in and going to that hospital to pay off that loan as you have going out. Those two things have to match. But a loan is actually a good thing when it's a loan to yourself.
That I can get. Though the thing is, I imagine that the phrase eminent domain probably rings a lot of alarm bells in people's heads, because I think what can kind of happen is that I have seen this kind of rhetoric in a bunch of different places where basically property rights are not an inherent attribute of humanity. They're in some ways a social contract. We decide whether or not BlackRock owns all the houses in an area based on what we're willing to do about that. That's kind of a difficult question where it's like, I do think when it comes to many, let's be real, serious reforms to where things are and where we would like to be, there are some very difficult questions about what games do we allow to continue unaltered. And mortgages is a great example. Eminent domain is one solution for that kind of problem. But the thing is, one of the things I kind of realize about this is that I think a lot of people are afraid of going in these particular directions, because it's basically telling the government, it's telling these corporations, it's telling other institutions, we are challenging your sovereignty. You're no longer playing this kind of hippy dippy game with shells and in somebody's backyard. No, this is a real attack on sovereignty, ironically, by trying to claim sovereignty for individuals. And I think once people realize how much sovereignty has been taken from them, that confrontation is inevitable at some point. Where is the dividing line here? But I do think when it comes to what people are willing to do and what people are willing to try out, it does lead to this awkward question of how willing are people really to directly contest sovereignty from either empire or these systems that do have a strong grip on people. Like, I don't think that's a trivial question at all. And I do think eminent domain, kind of like back during the Freedom Convoy, there was this MOU going around talking about wanting to change the borders of Canada or change who was in office. And there's a whole RCMP report on it, but it's like there are things that make governments very nervous and very violent. And I do think some of these questions do kind of veer into that territory. And it's hard for people to, again, have those kinds of conversations when it's like, how directly do you want to say, I think the system is illegitimate and I want something not just a little different, but radically different? And that's a serious question. I do think there are some real implications to that. And it's very hard because, again, we know empire is not, going to be gentle about these questions at all.
In order for empire to not be gentle, they have to work through someone, right? They have to be working through your local military, your local police. If you're the one who's paying those police and those military, then I don't know how that's going to happen. Like, one of the rules that I would make for my Commonwealth is that you have natives and long-term residents who then can transfer money from, say, dollars to carats at a 1-to-1 ratio in order to buy houses. I would not allow that to be possible for anyone who's getting their money from military or defense contractors past the initial. That once you're presenting a different way for someone to make a living, then I say, I'm not going to support your aggression by inviting you to bring that, that stolen money back here that you've gotten for that aggression against other people. So what I'm taking away is what the money's good for. Leave the money, take the assets. Just like The Godfather.
Right. And well, when it comes to the income from soldiering, that's an interesting question, because I've actually seen bits of that in the free open source software communities right now, where people are trying to add to their software licenses, this can't be used for either military or, I guess, immigration enforcement nowadays. Or it's like there are these real questions of, like, if we want to build tools and do things that are good, how do we stop it from going in the wrong hands? And of course, people will push back against that, and they're saying the US military is going to use whatever it's available. Your cute little software license isn't going to stop them, is basically the counter argument to that discussion. But I do think it's a really important thing for people to think about. It's like, if you are building something, whatever it is, if you are trying to create something, it is a reasonable and fair question to say, how can this be misused? And so I do think when it comes to various software projects, if you're building something that can be used by a military to liquidate people, maybe be a little careful about, distributing that publicly, or why you're, building that at all. Real questions here. But when it comes to that divergence between there is an economy that is downstream of this, I think this is where the imperial currency has its big asset, is it kind of lumps everybody together. It lumps in that grandmother trying to buy bread with the soldier coming to use his currency to buy, your stuff. It's like, it's basically all under one thing. And this is something I've also noticed somewhat as a pattern these days, where there's this hilarious meme, and it shouldn't be as funny, but it is. I'm sure you're familiar with Star Wars. There's the Death Star, and presumably there were engineers working on the Death Star to build the thing that blew up a planet and killed thousands of people. And the character has the speech bubble saying, "Oh, I'm on my way to my job as a morally neutral civilian." And the sad fact of the matter is that, yes, unfortunately, these kinds of activities do kind of blur those lines that make it very difficult. You may have sympathy for that random engineer who goes to his job to work on the Death Star or whatever it is, but are they really, innocent? And that's the thing that I think is actually the biggest problem when it comes to where we are now, is that there is, I would say, the one red line I have for like who I kind of consider an ally or a friend in this space is, can they identify innocence? Because it's like, if you're going to say nobody's innocent and that we should all, like whatever, I'm like, no, there's problems here. But the thing is you can't then use, I would say, the innocent in whatever the dynamic to then not admonish, to whitewash any of the actual serious crimes that take place. And I think you're right that it's like these lines are way blurrier than people think. And I think that raises the kind of complexity of how do we engage with this. And again, it's like, I don't think it's a simple question of some soldiers trying to buy something. How do you differentiate that between, many of these other things, when it is the same currency, it is the same system? And the only upshot of this is that I do think, with the way the system is going right now, like people are talking about freedom cities and like all this different stuff Palantir is going, is I do think that bifurcation of society is already happening. I do think if you're already working, in for the Death Star one way or another, you are effectively in a different situation now than most regular people are already. So I do think some of that divergence happens organically, but it's definitely not complete. It's definitely not a, yes or no binary thing.
Yeah, I would say, as you know from the back cover of my book, my core belief and only dogma is that all people are inherently good, and that when they behave badly, systems and stories are to blame.
Mm,
So right now, I would say we all work for the Death Star. I mean, really, the only difference is how many degrees you are removed.
yes,
That if you're
I
making
would say
a
that's
lot of
fair.
money, you're working directly for them. If you're serving the people who are serving the people who are serving the people, you keep getting more layers removed from that. But that's the only job there is. And so I don't look at innocence, or even right livelihood was a phrase that was big for a while. I say do what you need to do. Right now, if you're not doing it, somebody else is going to be. And if you are enabling yourself to be able to continue to own your own mind, that's the important thing. Until we have an alternative system available, I don't blame anyone for what they do in order to get through and care for themselves and theirs. And yeah, there's good people. There is not a good system. So in changing that system, what I'm saying is that going forward, I don't want to have the houses continue to be the reward for behavior that is sociopathic against other people. That whatever you're doing to someone else, if it would be wrong for them to do to you, it is wrong for you to do to them. That it always has to be reversed to be an ethical statement. And so to be behaving unethically towards someone else is not something that I would in the future have that be possible. But I would definitely make it possible for people right now, when that system changes over, because they should have the ability to make a new choice.
I definitely think there's a lot to that. And it's, I guess, one of the questions I would have as far as like, how clean a choice can it be? Because, like I said, for instance, if once we start going into things like eminent domain and different strategies out there for really creating that separation between old system, new system, one of the things I'm very concerned about these days is that the empire has its problems. And like you say, there's a lot of ways people are kind of like sucked into it, and it's the only job in town, effectively. And I've seen a lot of examples of that. And one of the things that scares, honestly, the bejeebies out of me nowadays is there are a lot of people who justifiably want to escape. They want to exit and build. They want to do something radically different without directly confronting the system for what it is. And in my like limited experience veering into this territory, what I've kind of seen over and over is that the few pockets of places where somebody can carve out a little existence, and forgive me for ranting about this, but there was this atrocious AI written article by Mike Adams talking about the three technologies to like live sovereignty off grid, and he was like, oh, we got solar, we got local AI, and I forget what the other thing was, but it was basically like three basically vanity projects as far as I'm concerned. Yes, they're interesting tools. Yes, they're fancy ways of doing things, but they, like the way I ranted about it was I said that this um won't even be sustainable in the society it's trying to escape from. And so there's this limited capacity to exist, quote unquote, outside the system. And what I have kind of noticed, and this isn't true in all cases, I'm not like trying to paint with a broad brush here, but I have noticed there are real instances where somebody tries to escape the system and there's kind of like this pack of wolves waiting for them because they know they're easy pickings. They don't have that community sovereignty. They don't have social networks of people to engage with. And so basically they're easy pickings for all kind of like predatory behavior. And so one of the reasons I take kind of what you're proposing here seriously is that people will give up on the idea of change within the system. And so then they'll be like, oh, I'm going to change things outside of the system. But then they get sucked into all these different parallel games that are arguably, I would say, more predatory and even more deranged, because at least within the system, there is some pretense of accountability. Whereas like, if you're all those people who lost money on cryptocurrency, basically it's like they're basically told it's a fool's part of with their money. There's no protection in that. And so the thing is that there is a real reason to want to say no, we have to switch away from this big system. But again, I think the challenge with that is then you are directly saying, yes, I am contesting the sovereignty of the system, which, hey, as a Canadian, I think is actually a very difficult thing to do, because it's like these systems are very clear with how much they're willing to use violence. And I do think it's hard because many people don't want to contend with how evil the system is. And so I think it kind of creates these kind of traps where it's like either you retreat from it, and so you can say, I'm innocent, I'm blameless because I'm outside of the system. Meanwhile, you're sucked into this other crazy game. Or you're saying, oh, well, the system can't ever change, therefore I am, I can rest easy no matter what I do inside it. And to me, I struggle with all of these different, points of view, because I feel like none of them are ultimately good answers for how do we want to live our lives. Do we want to, just do our best within the system? Do we want to exit and exist in these weird predatory arrangements? It's like a lot of these questions lead me to face the fact that what we do day to day really does make a difference, just not in the sense that Gabriel is unilaterally changing the system. No, I don't believe that's what's happening at all. But at the other side, it's like what I'm realizing is that, to me personally, I think my like top priority in far as understanding this is that I think that one of the biggest game changing idea is building the social foundations that a system change is even possible in the first place is the winning move. Because right now, when everybody's so atomized, if everybody's just talking to 6 different AI girlfriends instead of human beings, yeah, what even can happen? That's kind of the trouble as I see it.
Yeah, I think you're going back to that concept, though, between form and purpose.
Mm,
We've been tricked into believing that there is no purpose, that meaning doesn't exist. And that's more looking at spirituality and religions, that either you have this concept of God the psychopath, which is what I call the God of really all religions, or you have no God, which means that we're God, that we're creating everything that happens. And so that means that we shut down that imagination of what do we want to have happen, because we say, well, if it would actually work, they'd never let us get away with
Right.
it.
You hear that all the time.
Exactly. Yes. So that's why, rather than engaging locally, my focus, to be honest, is to have as much fun as possible locally.
How dare you?
I have all my different dance crews and farmers market connections, and I've got fun groups, and I do not talk seriously to them unless the opportunity presents. But I don't really try to change anyone's mind, because it's important to me that when I show up at that dance class, there's not someone who's going to be making me feel like, oh.
You know, sorry to interrupt, but it is funny you say that, because actually, as somebody who went from only, participating online and like actually like really enjoying having these kind of real conversations about, what we actually believe and what we're trying to understand, going to interacting in the real world where it's like you're not doing that at all. You're not there to bug every single person you see with all this stuff. That was a real culture shock for me. I'm like, oh, this is an entirely different game. And it's funny because on some level, it made me to realize it's like, oh, I was right all along to retreat online, because there is kind of this question of like, well, if that's where all the real conversations are happening. Yeah, I mean, like, maybe I'm being a little too facetious here, but it's like I did notice that. I definitely did notice.
And you're right to love that about being online, is that I used to say that I would go to the ends of the earth for a real conversation. And now the ends of the earth come to me.
Hmm.
And I don't have superficial conversations. I have long comment threads that go deep, deep, deep with people who share that question. I wouldn't even say share that passion or share that answer, because, as you know, I'm famous for disagreeing. I've made it into an art form. So having those nuanced conversations that move the whole discussion forward, I have been looking for that all my life. And now, thanks to the whole COVID con, I have it. I have people who have found each other, who are hungry for those real conversations. And so I don't need to make that happen in my personal day-to-day life, because I can wake up in the morning after I post something, and it's like Christmas. I get to open up my email or my Substack and say, "Oh, this person has a juicy answer that now I can build off of." And I think that's such a delight that has not happened in my life before, and that we should not be losing that.
Well, that's been a big motivator of mine when it comes to like my tech freedom passion project, because I do feel like there is a real desire by governments and corporations to ensure honest conversations can't happen. And that's why, like, if there's one quote that like drives me up the wall, and you'll see it in online discussions where someone's like, oh, you wouldn't say that, or somebody would punch you in the mouth. And it's like, it's funny to me because it's like everybody has this kind of like romanticized idea that real life social interactions are the bee's knees. I'm like, well, we have a lot of problems that were never solved before the internet. So maybe the internet can solve some problems. I'm not going to say it's going to solve everything. I'm not like, oh, we have the internet now, it's utopia. But I do think the ability to have honest conversations without face to face real life status games is very important. That's why when it comes to the consolidation of cyberspace, for instance, if everybody's going to be locked behind, an AI data center or Starlink or whatever it is, I do think there are serious questions about those infrastructure level problems, which is where I guess when it comes to the whole Hamlet's discussion, it's like I would be very motivated to ensure that, hey, can these actually talk to each other? And I think an important question anybody can ask themselves is, can I build a local internet of me and my neighbors, whatever the scenario is? I think that's an important thing to try to accomplish, because why not? It's like it's not an engineering impossibility. It's not like something, this is a huge technical hurdle. I would say it's more of a collective action problem. And that's the thing I kind of really noticed while digging into all of this, is that there are really simple, I would say, engineering or, technique answers to any of these, serious problems we have. But it is just, how do we get people interested in solving these problems and willing to spend whatever time or resources involved? And hey, that's not easy. I know this certainly hard. I had my own technical snafu over the last little bit, so I have to like kind of re-engineer my own stuff. But it's like, it is worthwhile to think about, I think.
Absolutely. And you're going back to this whole concept. So of I'm going to use the trigger word again, eminent. So I didn't realize, but it was Andrea Dworkin who coined the phrase, you can't dismantle the master's house using the master's tools. What the fuck are you going to use? Your fingernails to like pull off the nails? You're going to leave the power tools to them? What I say is we need to understand what their tools are and why they're so powerful so that we can take them back. So, absolutely, eminent domain has been used for the empire, for the corporations, for the dismantling of sovereignty. But if you want to take back things like the internet, you have to take back what is local. And your that idea of having local area networks that then connect into wide area networks that then connect beyond that, that gives you a protection. It gives you a protection, one, against scams because you've
Hmm.
actually got your technical people around. And I don't think you should look at it as, oh, this would be a lot for people to put in the technical time. They're already putting in the technical time. They're just using it
That's
non.
true.
So if we're the ones who are generating the carrots, and by the way, for listeners, that's the little up sign on it's not the orange vegetable. That if we're generating those and they're backed by the houses, all the people who are living in your vicinity, especially if you're in a tech heavy kind of place like I am, are going to want those jobs because those are the jobs that are going to give them carrots that they can then use on their housing and to keep up with that. So building these things, I think would actually be a joy.
Just to like really hammer home that point about oh, you can't dismantle with the master's tools, or however that quote goes. The thing is I do think it's a really important warning. Like, again, it's like I don't think we should like get people, oh, get big into prompt engineering, figure out how to get ChatGPT to write, the perfect thing. Like, I understand there are structural controls behind these things. And one of the things I've kind of been thinking about when it comes to these discussions is the more sophisticated our tools become, the more I would say it raises the bar for how serious and diligent and responsible we have to be over these things. For instance, nuclear power is a quite powerful. I know people debate whether nukes are real, but clearly there is some damage that can be done by these things one way or another. And so the thing is that I do think it is good to kind of warn that like we do need an aspect of care and finesse when it comes to how we use these things. And that's where it gets hard, because people will just have this MacGuffin mindset of, oh, I just need to use this thing because this thing is the victory, whatever it is. And it's like, no, it is part of a broader picture, a broader strategy, a broader understanding. And that's where the game really changes. Because again, yeah, you can't just take, I don't know, the Masters, spear and say, oh, I've defeated all his guards now. It's like, no, there is a larger game being played in any situation, but that doesn't mean that spear can't be used for anything useful. It's like, surely is some utility from these things. And I think walking that line does get very hard, because again, it's like, how much do you want to be sucked into those things? And I do think it is hard, especially nowadays, to kind of walk that line between using social media and social media using you. Even for me personally, it's the kind of thing where it's like, even how I talk about my weight loss, something so small and inconsequential as all this, it's like, if I post something to Facebook, it really incentivizes, oh, just post a picture, people will leave likes, it's like that's the exciting, whatever. But then, on my own personal blog, people actually read it, people actually engage, the deeper questions get delved into. And to me, it is so stark to see how you engage on these systems does have a real impact on these things. And so I do think it is important to ask, how are we using these tools that are, part of the problem in one way? But yeah, I'm definitely not in favor of, oh, just throw it all out. Like you said, use our fingernails. It's like, no, there's other things that can be done for sure.
Yes, and when I talk about purpose, I am not talking about, some vague thing. I think you need measurables. And so the things that you're trying to prevent or curb are monopoly ownership, and extraction. And what you're trying to incentivize is self-reliance at both the household and the neighborhood, and rippling up, so that the more times that a carrot can change hands before it ends up being totally cashed out and turning, into dollars or whatever imperial currency, is the better your system is. And having a game where we as Commonwealth designers could come up with, here's what I would do for my system. Here's my community. Here's what it looks like. Here's the problems that it has. And now here's what I would put in as my particular subsidies in order to make this happen, and then run it as an online game where you get extra points for kludging and stealing things from other people, and they get points for that too. And
Hmm.
it encourages that cooperation, but that it also has tangible measurements. And it's not just a nice to feel good thing. It demonstrates that if we were to make this single change and take back the houses, we could do all this.
I do like the idea of running a simulation and really demonstrating it, because I do think many different systems out there, people do kind of just need to see it work, and it's like that's an obstacle in many different ways. And I mean, I definitely think there would be a lot of people interested, like kind of playing the different parameters of, oh, if I make the tax really high, what changes, And for instance, I think it's Age of Empires is a big game, in that space that people love to play and play around with. So it's like I do think there would be real value in putting something like that together, especially because then you can kind of see the broader discussion that evolves around it, where people like have seen it play out so many times and they're like, oh, if you do this, it always ends up this way. Is there another way you can go down that path? And there are definitely a lot of really interesting techniques you can do if you set it up in a way that it's like, no, this is a simulation we're taking seriously, and we want to get information out of those simulations and see where they go. And like you say, I think it would be very revealing about how these kind of games can be played over time, because it's like there's a lot of good that can come out of people just, I would say, choosing to play some win-win interactions. I don't think the bar is actually that high.
Yeah. And what I like about the idea too is that there's no one winner, because everybody has a different commonwealth with different issues and different things that are going on. And so you essentially are just taking the best of what you find from other people and applying it to your own situation. But there's no one system that really is going to work for everybody.
Yet surely we will eventually find the perfect system that everybody should run from all the time in all ways. I'm skeptical of that, but I
No, no.
know a lot of people.
The framework for the system, there is a better
Mm.
framework for the system. And honestly, I will stand behind that my carrot system is the perfect anarchist system. It is what puts the power as low as possible, the power of choice, while making things interactive. So, so that I will say, there is a perfect framework for a system,
Mm.
but how you apply it is as unique as the place you live.
I think that's fair. And I mean, Empire has been a framework that has been applied basically everywhere. So I mean, I don't think there's no value in looking at things in those terms. That's for sure.
So I'm going to end and by asking you to tell listeners where they can find both of your, is it two excellent websites? Do your two
Yes,
two
yes.
excellent Substacks?
So yeah, that's a good question nowadays, because actually I've had a bit of a tech oopsie that is requiring me to kind of like basically rebuild certain things from scratch. But the good news is Substack's totally unaffected. So for those of you that are on Substack, I'm at libresolutionsnetwork.substack.com and microdosingfailure.substack.com. The second one being my weight loss journey, the first one being my tech freedom. And of course, everything that's there was originally mirrored to my main websites, libresolutions.network and gabe.rocks. But but a lot of things are in flux right now. Really, I am changing around a lot moving forward. Those links won't change. That's pretty much where things will be for a long period of time. But I'm definitely in a process of change right now. So we'll see how things look in a couple of months, is basically the timeline I'm looking at.
So, just for a dramatic effect, when you say, yes, my weight loss, that's no big thing, can you just tell people what actually has been over what period of time?
In the peak of my weight at the highest after the COVID period, I was 576 pounds. That was my highest recorded weight. And today I am just in the low 300s, high 290s. So it's like I've lost over 270 pounds. And it has been a heck of a journey. I mean, I'm still trying to inch forward, as challenging as that is. But I do say it's kind of no big deal in the sense that, well, I mean, people who listen to the updates will know that it's the kind of thing that it's like it's a journey, but day to day you don't feel any different. And that's the weirdest part about it. So I guess I do downplay it. I do underappreciate it because I'm greedy and I want more change. It's really the gist of it.
Well, I think of that as such a beautiful analogy for things that people think. This is just the way things are. You can't
That's
change
fair.
anything that is that major and that much a part of you. And what I've loved about reading your microdosing failure and listening to your videos, especially your walking ones where you're
Mm,
you're talking about the philosophy of it, is that you have so much compassion for other people. There is no ego that I've found in you, that you really give other people that benefit of the doubt. And that comes through in all the different areas of what you do is, and that is just what I'm so grateful for and why it
thank
is
you.
I wanted so much to talk with you as my first guest.
It means a lot. And I definitely think, I mentioned a bunch of reasons why I do think people really do need to think about different games. And I do think the caret system is a great model for people to really even just learn, hey, what's wrong with the way things are run now? It's the kind of thing, there's a lot of detail really worth going into. And I think that's kind of the big challenge. It's like, where do you start? And I think looking closely at mortgages is a great example of saying, hey, how does this affect other areas? Where can I see that kind of dynamic play out in other areas? There's a lot of very interesting detail to go into. So thank you so much for this. It really has been a great deal. And yeah, I hope everyone listening has had an excellent one.
Thank you so much.